Thank you very much, and thanks everyone for coming. This is my first BSides Basingstoke, and really enjoying it so far. So, I'm going to talk to you a bit about CL0P today. A bit about me, CTI researcher, doing it for about 4 years now. Work for a company called Equinix, which is, they like to say they're the world's digital infrastructure company, about 250 data centers worldwide, run internet exchanges and the internet backbone around the world. I work for the Equinix Threat Analysis Center, which is the ETAC, CTI, internal CTI team, and I'm a co-author of SANS 4589 Cybercrime Intelligence as well. I'm also a co-founder of a CTI trust group called Curated Intelligence, and you can find me on the various websites. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about the CL0P MOVEit campaign. You've probably all heard about it, keeping up with the news and everything. I'm going to kind of run through the who, what, why, where, when, and how. Talk about CL0P, talk about the hundreds of servers being hacked, just happened around the world. Everyone's really impacted by this. When it started, why are they doing it, and how do they do it? So who are these guys again? So CL0P, they are a Russian/Ukrainian speaking ransomware gang, financially motivated threat group, and they're tracked by various vendors. They've been around for quite a long time. And everyone's tracking them under various monikers, TA505, Fin11, Graceful Spider. There's a little bit ambiguity over who names them what and why, and it requires a lot of sort of CTI analysis and assessment work to fully understand these relationships, but that's sort of what, if you mention those names, people sort of generally understand what you're talking about. And kind of interestingly, a bit of a side note, but more recently Microsoft and SecureWorks said that they're related to Fin7, which is another large financially motivated threat group. So, you may have heard about CL0P in 2021. There was actually an arrest in Ukraine of their money laundering team. Actually, you had the Ukrainians and the Korean police turn up because they sort of have a joint operation taking down the CL0P operations. And they found all their money. They took away their cars. They basically uncovered the backbone money laundering operation that sort of drives the why a ransomware group does ransomware is for the money. And they also, when you're watching that video, you can see devices like Celebrite to do digital forensics on the macOS devices and things. So have they done this before with MOVEit? Well, yes, this is not definitely by a long shot, not the first time they've targeted managed file transfer systems, MFTs. They've gone after Accellion FTA in December 2020. They went after SolarWinds ServU in 2021. Go Anywhere and Papercut this year as well. So, there's a bit of a trend of them actually targeting these types of servers and systems just to perform data extortion campaigns. A bit of a timeline. Started, most people recognize the campaign probably around late May. Which was actually a bank holiday. So it was a bank holiday in the UK, and it was a bank holiday in the US. So it's almost like perfect timing to launch an attack because everyone's on holiday, right? And then, then Progress Software actually came out and said, our software has a vulnerability in it, it's being exploited in the wild. And then the information started to trickle out that it was potentially CL0P, it was potentially related to some of these previous MFT targeting campaigns. And then, actually CL0P started to confirm to journalists that it was them, and then they started to leak some of the victims, so we confirmed it was them. And then other sort of vendors came out and said, we saw the scanning for a particular file name that you would target when you're trying to exploit MOVEit MFT servers. I think it was like the human.aspx file. Greynoise said they actually saw scanning for that in March 2023. So it's almost like they were preparing this attack quite in advance. And then we had even more information that was extending the timeline, was that Kroll, which is a large company, they have a big instant response capability, and some of their victims in the IIS logs, they had exploitation of MOVEit servers all the way back in July 2021. So it's potentially CL0P has been sort of waiting and sitting on this for a long, long time and sort of preparing for this specific attack way in advance of what, it wasn't just a random weekend, they just started launching attacks. So when MOVEit actually, when you started to hear about MOVEit, when the Progress Software Advisory came out, Security Advisory came out, we started to hear about MOVEit being exploited. We looked on Shodan, saw about 2,500 systems exposed globally. And it wasn't just for some of these things where you have Microsoft Exchange servers being hacked or other devices, that it's like if it's cloud, it's pretty much fine, or if it's on-prem, it's going to be exploited. With MOVEit, it was on-prem and cloud as well. And then shout out to the Dutch Institute of Vulnerability Disclosure, DIVD, and Shadow Server as well. They're doing scans of the whole internet looking for the MOVEit servers, and then basically performing victim notifications as well that they have an exposed vulnerable device that anyone can contact on the internet. So how did they actually perform the attack? Sort of a bit of a technical breakdown. They started by scanning and targeting the servers. They exploited the sort of zero-day vulnerability as SQLi commands to upload a file, basically a web shell, and then from there they sort of were able to launch commands from the shell, and then actually started to enumerate and download files from the MOVEit servers. And also it's quite interesting because once they actually had been able to get onto the MOVEit file transfer system, it's on top of a Windows server, and they could actually be able to get to the Azure storage blobs as well, including credentials. So that's how they were able to download gigabytes and gigabytes of files. So after we heard about the advisory came out, MOVEit's being exploited, we started to hear the headlines of some of the victims of the MOVEit campaign, and this is why it's been such a thing that probably everyone in the room has heard about. It's because there's some massive companies who have been hit. All of these companies sort of either used MOVEit themselves, or they had a vendor or supplier that also used MOVEit, and that means their data was in their MOVEit server. So one company called Zealous, they serviced British Airways, BBC, and the Boots, and potentially all of the sort of HR and payroll data because Zealous is a HR and payroll firm, because the data they had in there, their customers and their employees of their customers are then impacted. And on the other side of the slide here, we have Raphael from Reuters, and he actually emailed Klopp asking, was it you? And they emailed it back saying, yes, it's us. So this is a nice Maltego graph that I created to try and explain the campaign in more details, just like take everything that's been put out there and sort of summarize it in one graph. And this was like very, very early on when this was before Klopp even had started to leak any of the victims. This was just based on sort of open source intelligence and putting all the information together and then tying it back to the threat group and the previous campaigns. And then it began. So some people call it the Klopp leakathon or the Aclopolis. And if you ever go on the Klopp leak site, you get this sort of waiting sign, and then you have to fill in the capture and things, and you can actually get onto their Tor site. So what actually did it look like if you go on the Tor site? Well, Klopp initially put up a statement saying, dear companies, Klopp is one of the top organization, offer penetration testing service, sort of broken English. And they kind of pretend that they are legitimate pen testers who already hacked you, so now you have to pay for their service, but they're just a ransomware gang. But no ransomware was actually deployed. It's just pure data extortion. They say things like your data is safe and email our team if you want to contact us about it. Scrolling down on that post, they sort of explain in more detail. They say that if you don't contact them and before June 14th, they're going to start publishing your names, like the company's names. They can provide data to prove that they actually stole it. All this kind of information about the hack itself, coming forward, confirming that they did it, and then trying to explain to companies how they can sort of resolve the situation, basically by paying a ransom. And then came the leaks. So then we had, some victims, just domains posted, and then we had more victims, domains posted, and then we had more victims, domains posted, and then we had more victims, domains. So it just keeps on going. And even probably this week is they just don't stop coming. They just hit so many companies. And even we don't actually know how much they stole from each company, but in particular, but every company that they claim they've hit, they are just putting up their name on the site. And then they kind of have like a bit of banter, a bit of backwards and forwards between journalists and things. This kind of interesting thing about these ransomware groups is that they try to control the narrative in a way. And the BBC started making, because the BBC is potentially a victim, they're covering the story very closely. They're making making reports and things, and they're saying things like, "Oh, we can't confirm what Klopp's saying." So Klopp kind of came out a little bit angry with BBC and say like journalists are controlling the narrative and stuff. Klopp basically came out and clarified some questions. They say, only Klopp has the MOVEit 0 day. No other groups have it. It's just them. No ransom. If a ransom is paid, the data. If a ransom's not paid, then data is going to be leaked or sold. They said, and the names will be published first, followed by data, and then they apparently have already deleted the data of government. So if you're a government, don't worry about it. And they also say things like, they don't care about experts. They have no reason to lie. The media is creating propaganda, and they just want money, and they are reasonable. It's kind of interesting for a threat actor to kind of come out and state all of these things, especially one with the most eyes on it in the world currently, probably. And another statement came out saying like, we have a lot of emails from government. We've already deleted it. Don't worry about it. They don't have any government data. They're just a penetration testing service. They're only financially motivated. They're not part of the Russian government or anything, and they don't care about politics. But this is kind of an interesting thing because they listed Ofcom and the Irish ComReg, which are government institutions. So they obviously have stolen it, and they obviously still have some of the data. Maybe they listed these companies that didn't even know they were government institutions. There's so many victims. One has to question, are they actually researching every victim? And maybe sometimes they're just waiting for the media to report it, and then they just react based on that. A little bit out of their depth on this thing. But then, like a couple of days later, they actually removed Ofcom and ComReg after people said that those are governments. A little bit more interesting was, some of the victims, PwC, Shell, massive companies, and they've already started leaking the data. Kind of an interesting thing about PwC is that Klopp's kind of like particularly focused on them at the moment for some reason. So, even this week, even yesterday or 2 days ago, Klopp actually registered a dedicated domain to host PwC stolen data. Some people suspect that this is probably because if you go to Klopp's Tor leak site, it actually takes like days or weeks to download any of the data because their Tor site is so slow. It's like 30 kilobits a second to actually download anything from it. If you're trying to download like 120 gigs, you're just going to be there until you're dead. They actually created this domain and started to host things on the ClearNet. Obviously, it's interestingly, it's on a Russian-based IP. Maybe a little bit of information about where these threat actors are based, so people can actually start to download stuff a little bit faster. It's not even that much faster. Another interesting thing about Klopp's leak site is they go ahead and share information about how to use their .NET leak site, which is kind of an interesting thing for a ransomware gang. A lot of 50, 60, 70 ransomware gangs that are sort of currently in operation. I don't think any of them have this on their leak sites. It's just Klopp that sort of explains to people how to download the data. So they're really focused on the value of this data and trying to make it worse for the victims, the fact that they've uploaded it to their leak site. So monitoring a Tor data leak site, if you're a CTI analyst or if you're just incident response, you're trying to basically help a victim understand how bad the leak is. Okay, maybe your domain's been added, or maybe some files have been added. How are you actually going to measure the impact of this attack? What did they actually steal from the MOVEit server? Did they get it all? Did they just get a little bit? Is it all sensitive? Who knows? But how you actually do that is, you navigate to the Tor Onion service. When you could use a burner laptop, or you could use a virtual machine with a VPN, or you could RDP to cloud VPS, like all these different safe ways to actually go to a Tor site. And then you just hit F5 and wait for more victims to come because they just don't stop coming. Or they can scrape the Tor site using Privoxy. Basically, find the URL for the Tor site. You go to the HTML. You look at the data locators. And then you just save it as a JSON or CSV. You can load it into something like Elasticsearch. And then once you've done that, if you're sort of proactively monitoring things for clients and things, you can monitor for keywords in some of those leaks and some of that data. Basically be like, hey, your company name or brand name or whatever is appeared on Clop, and other cybercriminals are probably going to download it. So the craziest thing about this breach, probably the reason why everyone in this room has probably heard of it, is the fact that it caused third-party, fourth-party, and fifth-party breaches. It seems everyone uses MOVEit. I mean, it is the leading MFT service in the sort of industry for MFT providers. And, it's like your vendors are impacted, your suppliers are impacted, your business partners are impacted. If you're just one organization, even if you don't use MOVEit, you're going to be impacted in some way, pretty much, because everyone that you're connected to likely used it, or someone they connected to, or they were connected to, So vendors of suppliers, vendors of partners, partners of suppliers, all this kind of interconnected global supply chain, basically. So, timeline of Clop campaigns. So, Clop as a threat group is an interesting one to sort of look at, because they first appeared in about early 2019, as a variant of the CryptoMix ransomware. They did used to launch targeted intrusion campaigns, so they used to sort of focus on a company, perform reconnaissance on it, gain initial access, all this kind of stuff, before they could actually steal data. They started by deploying traditional ransomware campaign, and then they sort of incorporated the double extortion, like the other ransomware groups have as well. They have connections to other well-known, long-established cybercrime groups like TA505. Sort of a partnership there of TA505, which is a prolific phishing threat actor. Once they gained access, then they would lead to the deployment of Clop. And then in April 2020, they actually had the first victim listed on the Clop leak site. So they've kind of joined the bandwagon. They've joined some of the other groups like Maze or Snatch or R-Evil, even at that point, possibly, of the whole thing of double extortion, data extortion. I think quite interestingly, later in December, that was the first time they decided they were going to ditch ransomware deployment and go for just pure data extortion. So just go for targeting file transfer servers, so XLE on FTA, file transfer appliance, steal data from it, discover a vulnerability, exploit it, steal files and data from it, and then sort of ransom them back to the victims. Everyone thought that a massive amount of victims started being uploaded to the leak site, and they thought Clop had just gone and deployed ransomware against all these victims. And then people started to realize that wasn't the case. It was just pure data extortion. Kind of an interesting shift in TTPs for this group at that point. And they kind of continued with some of the with the targeted intrusion and ransomware deployment. But actually, they went on and basically carried on that tactic as well in parallel. And now they've pretty much dropped the tactic of targeted intrusions, and now they're just doing data extortion, which is quite interesting. I'll get to more on that later. But yeah, in June 2021, the money launderers were arrested, as we saw. The Ukrainian cyber police busted down the doors, got their ankle grinders out, and broke in, and got all their money basically. But the problem was that didn't really stop Clop. I think a week after that, there were already new victims being added to the leak site. So that was just one component potentially connected to the ransomware group, rather than they actually arrested affiliates or ransomware operators or anything. They weren't really technical, offensive, cyber threat actors. They were just money launderers, which is a shame. But it did, obviously would have caused them cost and damage. But they're still active. Probably one of the more recent interesting developments was the fact that a Linux variant of Clop appears. So they are still interested in developing their ransomware, actual like binary and malware for deployment on files and servers. But they're kind of venturing out from traditional sort of Windows domains, sort of get to domain controller and then just launch PSexec to launch it across the network or whatever. They're actually starting to think about maybe more valuable sort of crown jewels type servers to go after. Things like managed file transfer servers, funnily enough. And then we had, earlier this year, 2023 has been a pretty big year for Clop. If this is the first time you've heard about this threat actor, then I recommend going and researching them, because they are basically threat actor of the year, in my opinion. And, go anywhere, MOVEit and PaperCut, at some point, your organization is probably going to be impacted. So, this is kind of interesting. It's like the old gen ransomware, the 7 steps. So initial access, establish a foothold, internal recon, lateral movement, move around the network, gain privilege escalation, steal data, download it, and then, the ransomware deployment, data encrypted. The problem with this process is the fact that it takes a long time. It could take up to a week, could take up to a month to actually perform all of these steps without being detected. And, they could be detected at any point of this before they actually get to this point of data encryption. And, if you're a ransomware affiliate, you have to work, or most of them work with a ransomware as a service. And there's always like a split cut between the ransom, or like the proceeds of the ransom. There's kind of all different risks and problems for these ransomware groups when they actually launch these attacks. I mean, they evidently have been very successful, but I think they could improve upon this business model. Well, they are starting to anyway. So pretty much this is what CL0P's doing. They've got the 3-step process, which is initial access, get a foothold, download data. That's it. And now there's less chance of them being caught. They can hit hundreds of targets in the weekend, maybe even thousands of targets in the weekend. So it's sort of automated exploitation campaign. And it's just the ransomware operator now. There's no affiliates, there's no cut or anything. You just do the attack. You can hit hundreds of companies and more flying money symbols. So who's next? The dreaded question, do your company, do any of your organizations or subsidiaries or partners or whatever, what managed file transfer software do they use? When was the last time it was updated? What security protections do they have for that system? Because I believe it's only a matter of time that one of these are going to be hit by CL0P next. It's a very, very effective campaign they've had. We've already had a law enforcement takedown against their money laundering, operators, and CL0P is still, they're very, very resistant. They're obviously based in a country, potentially Russia, that isn't going to give them up anytime soon. They're free to launch these campaigns and earn millions of dollars in cryptocurrency without being arrested. So it's only a matter of time they launch another attack against another system. So if I was you, do review what MFT server you use and potentially ask your vendor, have you seen all of these attacks against them? Have you thought about those? Yes. So in case you haven't seen it, I mentioned earlier that I co-founded a creative intelligence CTI trust group, and there's a GitHub repo that I'm updating, every week pretty much on the latest updates on the MOVEit transfer hacking campaign. Quite a few people have found this useful to, learn how, the history of every single update, pretty much major updates. And if you just want to go back and see as step by step as it's sort of unfolded, then the GitHub's the place to go. Thanks for listening, everyone. I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions. If anyone has a question, at the back.
Thank you. It's awesome talk. Do you have any idea how successful this has been financially? Obviously, lots of victims, but have they made much cash out of it?
That's a big question that everyone's asking. No, it's not unless you're like an exchange that victims have come to, or your chain analysis. You're not really going to be able to know how much money they've made so far. It's only until maybe a year later or something, maybe some sort of SEC report that we actually learn how much money it's actually costed some of the companies. There was one incident actually where CL0P kind of had an issue with a company called Ameritrade, and they said that they demanded a $4 million ransom. That was just for one victim. There's about 150 victims on there. So if they've all asked for like a $4 million around about ransom, if 1 or 2 of them have paid out of the 150, it's probably going to be quite a profitable campaign for that. Any other? Yeah, Mark?
It was, I think originally it was at BA and BBC, whatever the data's got in. Didn't they say they didn't have the data afterwards?
I think there might have been an update around...
so is that a sort of a paying rinse, perhaps?
We just don't know, really. There are a lot of these, ongoing massive global ransomware campaigns. There's so much different things happening on at the same time. Companies paying, companies negotiating, companies, just saying, no, we don't want to pay, and they just let their data be leaked, and maybe CL0P doesn't even have the data. There's so many different variables with some of these campaigns. it's difficult to track them all.
We can do it, really.
Question?
Do you think the move away from targeting or, say, extorting government or related entities is going to be a bigger shift for a lot of financially motivated groups, or do you think it's just our status quo?
So not targeting government entities. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting tactic to see ransomware groups shift from that. Or some ransomware groups, there's still small councils and things, government departments. Last year there was a whole load of massive attacks on governments. Conti and Hive hit the government of Peru and basically hit like 25 departments, or Costa Rica and hit like 25 departments. It just absolutely, they had to declare a state of emergency because there was that bad ransomware attacks. And they may have seen the fact that the FBI basically broke into Hive servers and, decrypted like 3,000 victims or something. They may have realized that could have been in response to crippling Costa Rican government. So there is potentially more risk involved with targeting a government because they have allies. And, if you target a NATO government, NATO kind of, they have support in the cyber realm. Question?
With CL0P saying they deleted all government-affiliated data, what do you think the reality is of most likely a Russian organization being backed or supported in some way by people like the Russian GRU or SVR?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of people do wonder about how these organized cybercrime groups are allowed to operate in Russia without having a connection to the government. It seems impossible, the fact that the Russian police or the Russian government aren't aware of these ransomware groups. They definitely are aware of them. There has been cases where during the Conti leaks, there was an example of messages of them talking about communicating with the FSB and things. So, if one ransomware group is doing it, all the ransomware groups are pretty much connected in one way or another. If you perform blockchain analytics on the payments and look at the shared wallets between affiliates and ransomware as a service operators, pretty much all connected. So if one group's talking about it, there's going to be others. And in an example like this, where CL0P has presumably stolen, there's plenty of governments that use MOVEit, and there's a good chance that CL0P stole the data from them. There's definitely a good chance that it could be in the hands of a Russian intelligence service as well. Okay, is that it? Thanks, everyone.